I have to say is, how can I follow that? All right? But it is what it is, and you got to move forward anyway, right? So we are in part 4 of a series that I absolutely love. And we've been saying that faith has a starting point, right? We've said this for just a number of weeks now, that our faith has a starting point. And we know that everything else has a starting point, but sometimes we forget that this is true about our faith as well. It's true for all of us, right? Once upon a time, none of us believed. We didn't believe anything. We didn't know what to believe. And then someone came along and they told us, believe this. And today, isn't it interesting that for many of us, whether it was directly or indirectly, that person was probably our mom, right? Whether they were the one telling us or they were the one that took us to the people or the places like church where we learned these things and we heard this stuff about what to believe, our moms were a part of that. And so you were given this stuff as a kid, right? We were told what to believe, and of course we believed. We believed there was Santa Claus, we believed there was a tooth fairy, and we believed in Jesus. We believed all of it, and it worked for us. And then we got into high school and maybe college and finally into adulthood, and some of you started to settle into responsible living. Some of you maybe aren't quite there yet, but we're happy you're here anyway. And for some of you, not all of you, but I would be included in the some of you part of this, there became this growing gap between the Bible stories you heard as a kid and what you experienced in adult life. And so one of the ways that we responded to this, or one of the two ways we responded to this, for some of us, we just decided we were going to power through it, right? Like, you know what? I don't care what I see. I don't care what it looks like. This is what I believe. And we kind of close our eyes and we just kind of power through it. And we tell people, don't tell me that. I don't want to know that. I don't want to look at that. You know, that kind of messes with my faith, so I'm just going to ignore that. And we just push through. And for others of us, when we see this gap, what we begin to do, and we say, you know what, this is what I was told, and this is what I'm seeing now. What we do is we say, you know what, that's a problem. And we've got to do something about this. And so here's what I was taught, and here's what I see. And I don't think many of us walked away intentionally from our faith, but what happens over time, as the foundation just gets chiseled a little bit more and a little bit more, and then faith becomes a little less relevant and a little less relevant. And so the next thing you know, you're graduating from college maybe, starting a new job, having kids, and our life just gets busy. And we didn't intend to do this, but as faith became less relevant and life got more busy, we just stopped doing the things we did and believing the ways that we did because of this gap. And so in this series, we decided to ask the question, what would it look like if we started all over? What would our starting point be? And we decided that it would be good if we asked some of the same questions we had as children, but instead of the same answers, we gave adult answers to these questions. And so that's what we're doing in this series. Now, we're in part 4. So if you missed 1, 2, or 3, I just want you to know at this link, you can watch all of them and all of our messages, nhloud.com/media. They all work together. So if anyone is here for just 1 week and wants to send me an email that I didn't like this, you can't do that unless you watch all of them. So go there, watch them again, watch them with others. It may become a resource that you share with somebody else. So today I think the thing that we're going to look at is perfect for Mother's Day. I don't know about you, but for me this week has been a really cool week. And I always think about my mom even more than usual this week, not only because it's Mother's Day, but it's also her birthday. So on Tuesday of this past week, my mom turned 70. And just a cool thing. And as many of you know, my mom has had some health issues and some different things she struggled with. But I got a text yesterday from my sister, and my mom and my sister are going to be coming down in the near future. And I think mom's going to kind of have an extended stay where she can hang out with her brand new grandchild. So she'll be here in Ohio for the first time, and many of you will get to meet her. So I'm excited about that. So the thing we're going to talk about today is this. We're going to talk about the role of rules. And while it isn't true for anyone, and I'm sorry if you had a difficult relationship with your mom, but for most of us, our moms had rules, right? And they even enforced those rules. But with mom, there was something different, wasn't there? Even when mom was enforcing the rules, didn't we always know that mom loved us, even when she had to enforce the rules? Now, it wasn't always that way with dad. Sometimes we were a little more afraid of dad, right? But we always knew that mom, even when she had to enforce the rules, that she loved us. And so today we're going to look at this idea of what are the rules all about? What really is the role of rules, and in particular, how it applies to faith? Because isn't it true that in every religion there are these pesky little rules? And in every religion there's also a rule maker. And here's the sad truth. It never gets to be you or me. Right? We are never the ones who get to make the rules. Some of us may be tempted to start our own religion just so we can make the rules for once. And so in every religion, there's rules. We have the 5 pillars of Islam, the 10 commandments, the Sermon on the Mount. It doesn't matter what world religion you talk about, there's always rules. And because we aren't the ones who get to make the rules, don't you find that we always kind of bang or bump into them? You know, there's these things that someone else said we had to do, or ways that someone else said we had to live, and so that can become something that's hard for us. And in Christianity, and I can poke a little more fun at us because, I'm a Christian pastor. This is my belief system. As Christians, we're even worse at this, aren't we? Because what ends up happening is, don't we have all sorts of versions of the rules? I mean, we have Catholics and Protestants. And then under just the Protestant umbrella, don't we have like millions of groups? And each one of them has just their own sort of take or way of looking at all the rules. And so we get all these different opinions about what the rules look like. So, if you grew up Baptist, for example, you had a lot of rules, right? And if you grew up Methodist, and you had Baptist friends, I just want you to know they looked at you and they thought you didn't have near enough rules. Like you probably needed a few more rules in your life to live by. And so we just have all these different rules. Last week, I talked to a guy who was part of a church, a growing, thriving church, but there were 2 different groups of people, types of people who made up this church, and they both had different sets of rules. And so at a time in the church when there was a crisis or a disagreement, what ended up happening is the one group with their set of rules thought that the other group was not being godly, and the other people with their set of rules thought those people weren't being godly, and they both kind of started to hate and mistrust each other. The church actually imploded and completely died. It just went away because of this. And so regardless of how you think about the rules or what rules look like for you growing up, the one thing is true, right? There was never a shortage of guilt and shame. For many of us, right, we learned the rules and we just never, ever felt like we could stack up. And so there was all this guilt and shame that went around. And so today, the question that I want us to wrestle with for the next few minutes is, what's with all the rules? Because for many of us, if we're honest, the rules were the thing that we rebelled against, right? We didn't like all the rules. And it's a part of why some of us actually left our faith, because we stopped going to church because of all the heavy rules. And so today we're going to talk about rules in this general sense and try to figure out what's going on with them and ask the question, is there some kind of starting point, a place in my mind where I can start to think about the rules and how they can make sense when we're talking about this God who supposedly loves us? And so today we're going to begin with this premise. Rules always assume a relationship. Whenever we have rules, there's got to be some kind of relationship. Whether it's religion or business, it doesn't matter. If there are rules and if you are accountable to those rules, if you have to do something with them, a relationship exists. And so just to help us understand and think about this, I want to give you some made-up categories, some types of rules that we get. If you have different groups or categories, that's fine, use yours, but I just want to give you some. And so the first two are the family model of rules and the club model of rules. Now, under the family model, what that looks like is that we were born into a family, and then at some point along the way, we were given rules. This is not true for us, right? You were born into a family. It's not like there were rules when you got there, but at different points along the way, you were given rules. And the rules for you changed, didn't they? Didn't rules change from when you were a kid to maybe you're a little bit older, and in high school, maybe they changed again, and in college, they changed again? And then as adults, they're even different. So at different stages of life, the rules were different. And eventually in our families, we outgrew the rules, but we were still part of the family, weren't we? So when you go back home to visit family now, if there were rules, is there a curfew? Do you have to be in at a certain time? No, the rules are gone, right? But we're still part of the family. You had rules not to make you a part of the family, but because you were part of the family. The other thing that's interesting about the family model of rules, you ever notice this? Parents only get to make rules for their kids. Now, we've probably all known kids that we've wanted to make rules for, right? Like, I just wish I could make rules for their kids. Or if they're your neighbors, it's like, here's the deal. As long as, if you guys move or we move, you can do whatever you want. But as long as we're here, here's the hours you're not allowed outside to interact with my kids and kind of, whatever. We wish we could do that. And even though that's true, rules are only for members of the family. They don't make rules that are... The rules don't make you part of the family. The rules are there because you are part of the family. Now, the club model is totally different, isn't it? With the club model, we actually have a list of rules that we have to agree to belong to the club. And so a lot of times we'll get a contract, and all the rules will be very clearly delineated, won't they? We'll know all the rules, and we have to sign somewhere that says that we're going to agree to and abide by the rules. And so under the club model, we get in by agreeing to the rules, and we get to stay in as long as we keep them, right? And if we don't keep them, we're what? Out. Yeah, we don't get to be a part of them. So just for fun, let me give you a third group, okay? The third group is the Homeowners Association model of rules. Bethany and I, 2 times in our life, lived under these kinds of rules. We bought homes in neighborhoods where there was a homeowners association, and there was, I remember one time someone printed it off. It was like this big. Even if you wanted to know all the rules, you couldn't even read that sucker if you wanted to. It was just a huge thing. And so under this model, what ends up happening is there's these rules that you may or may not even know about, right? And what we do is, we buy a house, and no one can tell us we can't buy the house. We can buy the house. We can live there. We can belong there. But at some point, probably because we didn't obey someone's set of rules that they were, kind of arbitrarily agreed upon, we get a nasty note in our mailbox telling us about all the rules we have to sort of come into compliance on. Now, they can't tell us we have to move. They can't kick us out, but they can make life hellish enough to make us wish that we lived somewhere else, right? This is kind of this third way. And so the idea, again, is that whenever you have rules, there's some kind of relationship. But isn't it confusing? I mean, even just taking these three models, if you overlay those on top of the idea of religion and faith, it's no wonder it's confusing. And so many of us ask the question, well, if there's all these different models, which model does God use? Is it we're in, but then there's these rules to help us to kind of govern how we're supposed to live? Is it that we're in because we agreed to the rules and as long as we keep them, we're good, but if we don't, we're in trouble? Or is it that we are in and no one can really kick us out, but you know what? We just may get nasty notes every now and then in our mailbox from God, and He can't actually kick us out, but man, we feel our whole lives like, you know what? He doesn't really love me, and He just kind of puts up with me and my brokenness. So when I say these categories, for some of us, we start to think theologically, right? We start to think, how does God work? I mean, how does this happen? And for others of us, we start to think emotionally, right? Because we've lived life and we've had some experiences. For some of you, you were taught that it was one way, but you felt like it was another, right? You maybe were taught it's the family model. We're all part of God's family and we belong and He loves us. But man, you felt guilt and pressure, and that if you didn't live up to certain level of expectations, you were in serious trouble. And so for all of us, we wind up asking the question, how do I stack up with what God wants of me? We have to wrestle with this. When am I in? When am I out? And how the heck am I supposed to know? So in order for us to figure this out, we're going to look at one of the oldest sets of rules ever given in the history of the earth. It's actually the third oldest set, and it's the most well documented. It's actually documented in Christian literature, it's documented in Jewish literature, and it's documented even in Islamic literature, believe it or not. And we call it the 10 Commandments. And we were given the 10 Commandments. They came to earth about 1446 BC. All three of the main world religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, believe that these rules, this law showed up, that God gave it to Moses. They all believe that. You need to decide what you believe about that. That's not the point today. But here's the interesting thing, is that pretty much nobody knows all 10, right? If we were going to sort of do a thing, I mean, some of you may have learned a song or a little way to memorize it, but most people don't know all 10. For most of us, we know 2, maybe 3, right? We know we're not supposed to do that adultery thing. Don't steal, and that's kind of the same one, right? Because you're just stealing, but you're stealing somebody else's, whatever. And then for some of us, we know the third one too. It kind of goes like, isn't there something in there about being honest, right? Like not telling lies. And then beyond that, for most people, we don't even know. The other thing that's interesting that we don't really know is where in here that they're found. If someone said, hey, is the 10 Commandments in the Bible? We go, well, yeah. Well, where is it? We go, in here, right? So if you get nothing else from today, some of you may be here today because you were tricked or guilted yourself. Your mom said, please come to church. It's Mother's Day. It's Mother's Day. So you're here and you're like, great, I got to go to church, right? And so if you're here for that reason today, you're going to learn something. And so in the Bible, the 10 Commandments are found in Exodus 20. Can we say that together? Exodus 20. Can we say it one more time? Exodus 20. Okay, so the 20th chapter of the book of Exodus, Genesis, Exodus, second book of the Bible, that's where the 10 Commandments are found. So, you know what? If nothing else, you were all a little bit smarter than you were before you came here today. Okay? Where in the Bible are the 10 Commandments found? You guys are awesome. Nice job. Last week, we talked about Abraham, and I just want to give a little bit of info there that's going to kind of connect last week and this week. God promised Abraham that He was going to make him a nation, even a great nation. But what was the problem? Abraham didn't have any kids, and in particular, he didn't have any sons, right? You're going to need sons in order for your line to spread and for this to happen. And so at one point, Abraham panics, and he's like, we're getting older, and this just doesn't look like it's going to happen. So he says to his wife, what should I do? And she says, well, it doesn't look like, I'm up there and I haven't been able to have kids. It doesn't look like I'm going to have kids. But my handmaiden, it's part of the story, my handmaiden is able to, so maybe that's the answer. So Abraham sleeps with her, the handmaiden of his wife, and she has a kid. And look at this. On that side, the child that was born there was a son called Ishmael. And then, as God promised, Abraham and Sarah had a child, and that was Isaac. Now, the Islamic nations, the Arab nations actually believe that Ishmael was the son of blessing, and the Jews and the Christians believe that Isaac was the son of blessing. Now, the interesting thing about Ishmael is we don't really learn about him being the son of blessing until 600 years after Jesus, when the prophet Muhammad talks about this and really connects them back up with Abraham. And so that's kind of interesting. Now, let's put that back up one more time. So Isaac then has a son named Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. And we see sort of the beginnings here of God fulfilling this promise of making Abraham into a great nation. Now, one of these 12 sons that Jacob has, his name is Joseph, and many of us know the story of Joseph. He was the youngest at that point, and there was another son after him, but he was the second youngest, and he had a coat of many colors, right? We know this, and his father liked him best, and all his brothers hated him because of that. And so they did some mean things to him, and they were going to kill him, but then they sold him into slavery, and through a whole bunch of twists and turns, he winds up in Egypt, and he actually becomes second in command. He becomes the prime minister of Egypt. How cool is that, right? And so then what happens is he gets his whole family to come to Egypt because there's this drought, there's this famine in the land, there's no food. And so he spares all his family. They all come and they live in prosperity in Egypt. Well, what a great story, right? But then here's what happens. The Egyptians start to worry because these Israelites are multiplying like crazy, right? They're just fruitful as all can be. And so some of the Egyptians say to Pharaoh, look, if we don't do something about this, pretty soon there's going to be more of them than there are of us, and we could be in trouble. And so Pharaoh enslaves the Israelites. And he enslaves them for 400 years. So let me just say this. Has anyone here ever had a bad day? Or a bad few days? Or even a bad week? Or a bad month? Right? And isn't it interesting how, this is true for me, I only have like a bad day or a bad week like once, maybe twice a year. And it messes with me on like a deep, deep, deep level, right? And isn't it funny, like we just have like a bad day or a bad couple days or a bad week or whatever, and it messes with us, right? It can even mess with our faith. 400 years, they're enslaved. They're in slavery so long that Father Abraham became nothing more than a fairy tale, right? Because it's just like a story that they heard. So the next time you're having a rough day, week, month, remember 400 years. And, we can get through a season that's rough. Let's just pray no 400 years, right? Amen? Good. I'm glad you guys agree with that because that wouldn't be good. So think about this. As they're slaves in Egypt, as a people, the Israelites would have got together as a community, maybe just as families, and they would have had Bible story time. And they would have talked about Father Abraham. And they would have said, hey, God made a promise long ago to our people through Abraham that we were going to be a great nation. And then there's this pesky kid in the back, right? Ooh, yeah, you in the back? Yeah. About that great nation thing, we're slaves. All right? Yeah. You know what? But here's the deal. The promise was that God would eventually bless the whole world through us. And that same pesky kid, right? The one in Sunday school class who you give a Bible story and they're always asking those dumb questions. And you're like, would you just sort of be quiet, kid? Right? And he's like, ooh. Great nation, blessed everyone, awesome. But again, slavery, right? 400 years of slavery. And so even for them, their current reality and the things they would have said, these stories, they didn't match up. And they didn't match up for 400 years. And so for most of them, they would have started to think, this just isn't even going to ever come true. Like we're just sort of stuck here. And so one day, God sends Moses in. And what's the message? What does Moses say to Pharaoh? He says, let my people go, right? Let my people go. It's time for the people of God, for Israel, to get out of here. And what does Pharaoh say? No. And so nature freaks out. And there's these plagues that happen. There's locusts and boils and frogs and water pollution, all kinds of things. And then again, Moses says, let my people go. And eventually, through all this stuff, Moses gets to lead God's people out of Egypt. An interesting thing, the name Moses is mentioned more in the Quran than any other name. And the only reason I mention that to you isn't so you go out and get a copy of the Quran or anything like that, but just to know that it's not just a name that appears in our Bible or is a Jewish thing or a Christian thing. Moses is an actual person who lived in history, and many faith traditions actually talk about him. And so 3 weeks after Moses leads them out of Egypt, they wind up at the base of Mount Sinai, where Moses goes up and he gets the 10 Commandments. Now, these people didn't know anything except for slavery. And God is giving his people, this nation, their first set of laws, their first set of rules. And a part of that is the 10 Commandments. Now, if I wanted to find the 10 Commandments, where would I look for that? You guys rock today. Sweet. So here's the introduction. We're just going to look at one today. But here's the introduction, the prelude, if you will, to the 10 Commandments. And we get this major insight into how religion and God and rules all work together. So watch this. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who? And the people would have said, who are you? Like, we heard about Abraham, and we heard all these stories, and even about this promise, but we don't know you. Who are you? And how did this happen, God, who is saying that you are our God? How did this happen? Because we haven't even done anything for you, right? So then he continues. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Now, don't miss this. God is saying, I am the one who has done something for you even before you have done anything for me. In your darkest time, when you completely given up hope, when you thought there was no way out, I, the Lord your God, sent a deliverer who brought you out of Egypt. God says, I have done something spectacular for you, and you have done nothing for me. And the people would have said, well, right, we haven't done anything for you because we don't know what to do for you. I mean, we've never even got the rules. And God says, I know. I know, but before I give you any rules at all, the thing I need you to know, the thing that we need to lock in is that I am your God and you are my people. And once we know that, then I want to give you some things that are going to help us to live well together and will help you live well together. But first, before any rules, I am your God and you are my people. And then let's establish that, and then we'll move into the rules. So in Egypt, after the plagues and before being delivered from Egypt, God, through the prophet Moses, he says this thing. He says, trust me. Right? We talked about this last week. And so they were told on this one particular day, slaughter a lamb. Now, this would have been something they would have done a lot of as part of their religious practice. But this one particular day, God says, slaughter a lamb. Well, God, why today? Why would we do this? God says, trust me. And then he said, I want you to take the blood from that lamb and I want you to put it on the doorpost of your house. Well, God, why in the world would we do that? Trust me. Oh, and by the way, as you're doing all that other stuff, pack up your things because tomorrow we're moving out of Egypt. Can you imagine? After 400 years, generation after generation after generation has lived in Egypt, and then God says this, wouldn't you want to go, yeah, right, God. We're leaving tomorrow? Sure, God. And God says what? Trust me. And to this day, the Jews celebrate Passover when the angel of death passed over all of Egypt, and everyone who had that blood was preserved. The firstborn son was preserved, didn't die. And to this day, the Jews celebrate this not because of the Ten Commandments or even being delivered from Egypt, but they celebrate this as a way to say, look at the amazing things that happen when God whispers to his people, trust me, and we choose to trust him. It's incredible. And so this is the preamble. And then 3 weeks later, they're at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses is getting ready to go up and get the 10 Commandments, these first rules. But he says again, first remember that you are my people and I am your God. And then there's these rules that are going to help us live together. Where can we find those again? Awesome. Okay, so look at their very first one, okay? And their very first one isn't a thou shalt not, huh? So watch this. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, if all this had just happened to you, wouldn't the response of Israel been a collective, duh, right? Like, God, you look at what you've done for us. You know, we didn't do anything for you, and you delivered us from Egypt. Isn't this incredible? We didn't have hope, and now we have hope. We didn't have a future, and now our kids have a future. And we didn't have land, and now we're going to even have our own land. So God, why wouldn't we do that? If this is what you want for us, you can put a check in that box, right? So here's the point. Think about this. The 10 Commandments were confirmation of, not a condition of, Israel's relationship with God. Was it, if you do these things, then you can be my people? No. Is it, if you do most of them, we'll see? Was it, if you mess up 8 or more, I'm going to have to look for new people? No. It's before you have done anything, I am your God and you are my people. Now let me give you some helpful rules so that we can live successfully together under my authority. And he says, just don't have any other gods before me. And you know what? If there's anything else you need so that I can demonstrate that you just need to trust me, you can trust me, let me do that. Has anyone ever read through the whole Old Testament? You know, you start off in Genesis, it's fun. Exodus, fun. That's where we find what? In Exodus 20? Yep. And then you get to like Leviticus and Numbers, and you're like, ugh. And then, if you've actually gotten there, you get to the prophets, right? We got a lot of prophets, and they just seem like these crazy, wide-eyed guys who are like, you know, kind of mad at everybody, like, don't do this, turn from your ways. Which is funny because right here, we see that God's people are like, we would never do that. God, we would never turn from you. And what do we see over and over and over and over and over again with the prophets? That God's people actually did turn from him and to other gods. And so what we learn here is that God is a great parent, right? It's like God with his people does this. He goes, 1, 2, 3. And if you actually get to the end of that, then what is it? It's like, okay, you're in timeout, right? And there was one point where God actually put his people in timeout for 70 years. But he didn't give up on them. God says, I'm not giving up on you, even when you were the one who turned your back on me. The history of Israel is proof that with God, the rules are not the club model, but rules are the family model. With God, relationship always precedes rules, right? Relationship comes before and is more important than the rules. God opts for the family model over the club model. And so, just as we think about that, and if we really want to wrestle with this, you will come to see this is certainly true in a religion with the God of Israel. The role of rules are confirmation of, not a condition of Israel's relationship with God, right? It just confirms, we're part of the family, and the rules aren't a condition. Oh, you're out because you didn't. No. We do these because it's like you're a part of this people, and here's how we're supposed to live then. But it's the same for us, right? Or we would hope. And God is like a parent. He only gives rules to the children who are already in relationship with him. And if this is true, this is staggering. That God disciplines us over and over, not to pay us back, but to bring us back. Right? That God's discipline isn't like you deserve this, I told you here, but it's to bring us back to him. This says something about the experience and the expansive nature of the love of God. For me, and some of you, I'm sorry because you didn't have great relationships with your moms. For me, this makes me think of my mom. Right? My mom always loved me no matter what I did. But what if Israel and Abraham were not a model, but what if they were an aberration? What if God just really liked them, right? Like they were God's favorite? And essentially, what if God plays favorites? Right? Maybe he does. Maybe God plays favorites. He's like, you know what? If you believe in me once, we're good forever. And I'm kind of bored today, so I'm going to pick somebody. Israel. There we go. You guys are in. But those Americans, I don't know. The Canadians, I like them a little better, but I don't know. Europeans, nah. Right? Like, how does this work? Like, Israel's good, but the rest of you, just do your best, and we'll see in the very end. Never really knowing if God grades on a curve or not. And here's the amazing thing for you to consider as you explore this for yourself. When God made this promise to Israel and to Abraham, it wasn't just about them, it wasn't just about Abraham, but it was about all mankind. And here's how I know. Remember this promise from last week to Abraham, and we're landing the plane now. It says this, Genesis 18:18. All the nations on the earth will be blessed through you. Not just all the nations that came through Abraham, but all the nations of the world. And then through the prophet Isaiah, God makes this even more clear and specific. It says this, I will also make you a light, a signpost, this blazing image that when people see you, it will point the way. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, so everyone who is not Jewish would be Gentile, that my salvation may reach, where? To the ends of the earth. As much as I love Israel, God would say, as much as I love Abraham, this is about so much more. This is about my salvation reaching to everyone and to everywhere. And so it shouldn't surprise us at all that 1,500 years after these rules, after the law, when Jesus comes on the scene, before asking for anything, before demanding anything, what does Jesus do? He turns nature on its head. He heals people. He calms the storms. He speaks to the wind. The people who are closest to Jesus actually a number of times said that they were terrified to see the kind of power he had. And then what does Jesus say? Jesus says, trust me. Trust me. Guys, just trust me. Because the promise that God gave to Abraham and Israel is the promise that comes to us through Jesus. And so John, the gospel writer who knew Jesus the best, the one who, when Jesus was getting ready to die, looks at John and says, hey, look after my mom, right? Like, this is how close they were. When John is reflecting back on his time with Jesus, here's what he says. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who behaved, right? Did all the right things at the right time? No. To those who believed in his name, in the name of Jesus, God gave them the right to become club members, neighborhood association members, or family members. He gave them the right to become children of God. And just as God adopted the nation of Israel, he wants to do the same for you. Because with God, it's always the family model. And so God says, anything I require of you, anything I ask you to do, it's only because I love you, and it's only because we have a pre-existing relationship. And oh, by the way, you can trust me, because everything I have always done has been for you. And so as we end, and there's been a question every week, and I'm going to give you a question today to wrestle with. If you're in a small group, talk about it in your groups. If you're not, talk about it with a friend. Talk about it over lunch today. Talk about it on your drive home. Here's the question. Growing up, and I say growing up because this isn't a theological question. This is just a practical question. Growing up, did you feel like religion was based on the family model? You know, like where you're just you're a part of the family? Or the club model? You know, you're in if and as long as you, or the homeowners association model where you just never really knew. What was it like for you? What did you feel like? I don't care what you were taught. What did you feel like? And that's where we're going to pick it up next week. And so, Father, today I thank you so much for this incredible truth. God, I thank you that with you, it's always the family model. That you love us and we're a part of your family. And then you give us these rules that help us to live successfully with you and with each other and with the world in which you've placed us. And so, God, today I just pray that you would help us to know how much you love us and how much this incredible promise that was for Israel and was for Abraham is also for us. So, God, help us today to take a hold of that as we celebrate you, Jesus, as we celebrate our moms. God, we want to know that we're loved. We thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, as you guys take off today, the band's going to play a song on the way out. But I want to encourage you, if you're a mom, you've become a mom, or you're going to be a mom, starting at the beginning of 2013 on to through now, come up front, and there'll be people up here to help you